Guten Morgen. The next project is going to be a big one again, literally. And to create a big project, or dress in this case, we need a big understructure. So today we're going to make a tulle skirt. A big one. Stay tuned if you want to learn how to make one yourself, find out some useful tips about working with tulle, and of course, if you want to see some cozy sewing. If you've been around here for a while, you know that I've already uploaded a video that covered 3 ways of making a tulle skirt. If you've seen that video, this tulle skirt is based on number 3 in it. However, looking back, I tried to fit the whole explanation into 5 minutes of the video, I think, which for such a complex tulle skirt really isn't a lot. So today I think we'll take a bit more time. To make sure everything will be covered, I'll divide this video into a few chapters. First one is preparations, where we talk about tulle in general and what you need to know and do before cutting into the fabric. The second one is the understructure, where we only talk about the base layer of the skirt, where everything will later be added to. The next 2 chapters are all the layers that are added to the tulle skirt. First all the straight layers, and then second all the circular layers. The last chapter will be about finishing touches and how to take care of such a big tulle skirt when it's finished. Seems like we've got a lot to do, so let's get right into it. Tulle is easy to use if you know how to handle it, and the first thing you need to know is which type of tulle works best for your project. Tulle with bigger holes, for example, is usually the stiffer one, while smaller holes means the softer drape. Even though stiffer tulle is often associated with cheap costumes, it doesn't necessarily mean it's lower quality. You just have to know for which things you can use it best. When working on something structured, for example, it's perfect for inside layers or to give volume or even to create an interesting texture. For softer tulle, I would usually recommend bridal tulle. It has a high quality and also comes 3 meters wide, just what we need for all of the big tulle layers we will later have to cut. But if you don't have wider tulle available, you can easily divide the layers in different pieces. And I'll later show you how I sew the tulle pieces together and how I try to make the seams as invisible as possible. But cutting and sewing all the different tulle layers is already a lot of work, so whenever you can skip out of a step by using wider fabric, I would totally recommend that. Of course, because tulle is not woven, it has a little bit of stretch to it. However, I wouldn't recommend to use extra stretchy tulle for your tulle skirt. Another thing you have to think about is the material the tulle is made from. I usually like to use nylon tulle, but you can also use cotton tulle or even silk tulle. As you can imagine, silk tulle has a very elegant and soft drape, but it's also pretty expensive. Knowing the characteristics of the material you're using is also very important when you're handling the fabric while creating the skirt. It already tells you a lot about how you can iron it, for example. So you really should think about it beforehand what kind of tulle you want to use for your project. One more fabric besides the bridal tulle that we will be using for this project is petticoat fabric. It's also a type of netting, but it's a lot sturdier and stiffer than even the stiff tulle. I'm going to use this fabric just for the base layer. Since all of the other layers will later get attached to this one, it has to be very strong, and for me using this type of fabric always worked best. But it would also be an option to use 2 or 3 layers of the stiffer tulle as a base layer if you don't want to get petticoat fabric. And I also feel like this comes in more variety color-wise than petticoat fabric. So if you wanted to match with your bridal tulle, this is probably the easier route to go. Apart from this fabric, I was also already on the hunt for the fashion fabric that will later go over the tulle skirt. And let me tell you, it wasn't an easy task. I had a very specific vision in mind, preferably in exactly the right color, but it was nowhere to be found, not in any local shops or my go-to websites where I usually order my fabrics. So this meant diving deep into the world of online fabric stores. And luckily I had the sponsor of today's video, NordVPN, on my side for that. NordVPN is a cybersecurity service that encrypts your internet connection and also protects you and your privacy on your online adventures. Feel free to check them out using nordvpn.com/Frieda or click the link in the description. For me, those online adventures meant searching online shop after online shop on the hunt for the right fabric. But do you have any idea how many, let's say, sketchy websites I came across, and not all of them were as easy to spot as this one. But for that I had NordVPN's Threat Protection Pro on my side. It doesn't just protect your internet connection, it actively warns you if you get on a fake online shop. And in a 2024 test by AV Comparatives, NordVPN ranked third in fake shop detection, ahead of many premium cybersecurity tools. Whether you're buying fabric or you're just browsing, it's like having a digital bodyguard with you all the time. So if you're shopping online, especially on websites you haven't heard of before, go to NordVPN/Frieda to get a 2-year plan plus 4 additional months with a huge discount. It's risk-free with Nord's 30 days money-back guarantee. Click the link in the description to get the best deal on NordVPN and stay protected, no matter what materials you're hunting for online. Now that we've got all of our fabrics, we have to prepare our pattern pieces before we can cut any layers from the tulle. And luckily we only need 2 small negative pattern pieces for the whole tulle skirt. The negative pattern is called that because you use that part which you would usually cut away if you would do a normal or positive pattern, if you will. It's very useful because it not only saves a lot of paper, but it's also way easier to handle than those big skirt pattern papers. And if you want to make a skirt with different layers that all have different sizes, then instead of making a lot of positive patterns, you can just make one of those. Another way to measure the skirt layers would probably be to just spread out the fabric and directly use your measuring tape to not only measure out the length, but also the hole for the waist. With the negative pattern, however, you can draw on those straight lines, which you can use as a guide to measure along them, which ensures that you've spread out the measurements evenly, and this will just make the skirt even more precise in the end. To create a negative pattern, you just need your waist measurement. Now for the first pattern piece, we don't want it to have the full circumference of the waist, but half of it. So instead of dividing it by 2 times pi, which would get us the radius of the whole circumference, we will just divide it by pi, so that in the end, this line is half of the waist. Now that we have the right length, we can draw a quarter circle from it on our pattern paper. Since it's a negative pattern, we have to think about preparing it in the opposite way than we would do it with the positive pattern, which means instead of adding the seam allowance, we have to take it away. This way the positive, which will be the cut layer in the end, has the seam allowance added. This is now our first negative pattern, but in order to get some variety in the layers, we have to make another one. This time, however, we do divide the circumference of the waist by 2 times pi. And since once again we only draw a quarter from it, this time it's actually the quarter of the waist measurement. At the last step I'm going to divide the pattern piece in even parts and draw lines from the center outwards. Those lines will later be used to measure along, and this way you can make sure that your measurements are even all around. So now we've got a bit more familiar with all the fabrics we're going to use and also prepared all the patterns we need. So now I think it's finally time to actually start on the skirt. Usually making the base layer is pretty straightforward. It's just 1 half circle done with the bigger negative pattern template. But in this case I didn't have enough fabric at one piece, so you see me piece it together a little bit. I'm making sure to sew all the pieces together with a few seams to have a strong connection, and since this layer won't be seen in the end, it really doesn't matter that it has some extra seams, and we could save a little bit of fabric. Once this was done, I still had to align the negative pattern with the edge of the fabric and use it to trace the length I need. The length is usually the measurement from waist to floor minus a few centimeters. I usually subtract around 10. This way the stiffer base layer hangs freely while moving in the skirt. After measuring all around, I could cut out the half circle. Now I had another problem because the tulle I want to lay over the petticoat fabric is a light one, and I was scared the dark petticoat fabric could be visible through it. But since I didn't have enough white petticoat fabric, I decided to simply add a small layer at the top. The bottom would be covered with enough tulle layers, but this way nothing dark would poke out at the top as well. To secure both layers together, I sewed over them along the lines marked on the negative pattern. This divides the skirt in even pieces and helps later on to spread all the tulle layers evenly. When using a white base layer, I usually just draw those lines onto the fabric, but since the chalk I used to mark the dark fabric wasn't as permanent, I decided on continuing the lines I sewed before down to the hem. After all vertical lines were added, I continued by marking the different heights the tulle layers will be added on. And since here again I wanted to make sure they would stay on the base layer, I sewed them on as well. With the base layer finished, you can see the lines marking the height of the layers being closer together at the top and then with wider spaces at the bottom. This will result in a nice silhouette for the skirt later. Now it's time to work on the first layers that will be added to the skirt. Since they are straight layers, they are very easy to prepare. All the lengths are measured on the tulle and then cut in a straight line. The length from the first layer is the distance from the first marked line on the base layer to the floor. The next layer already has the length from the second marked line down to the floor, and this way all the layers are getting gradually longer. Each layer contains of more than one strip cut from the tulle, so before they can be added onto the base, we have to prepare them a little bit. First, all the strips from each layer are sewn together, so if your first layer contains 6 pieces of 15 cm, then you sew all of them into one continuous strip. Each seam is then ironed and cut to make it as invisible as possible. After that, the top of the strip has to be gathered. If you use the 3 meters wide bridal tulle and the strip is made from 6 pieces, then this would already be 18 meters of gathering thread. After preparing all the straight layers exactly like that, the next step is to add each layer to the base. And for this, the lines on the base come in handy because you can use them as well as your seams on the strip to align the added layers and divide them evenly. I usually always find the middle of the layer and pin it to the middle of the base, and then continue with the 2 halves, find the middle of each again and pin it in place. I'll do this until I have small parts pinned to the base all around and then pull the gathering thread. Then the layer is secured to the base by sewing over the gathering thread again. And all of this will be done over and over again until all the straight layers are added onto the base. Guten Morgen! So we're finally done with all the straight layers, and before continuing with the next step, I thought we could talk a little bit about this step and what I exactly did with it. Because I think I've shown you how I did it, but in order to make your own tulle skirt, you really have to understand why all the steps are made. And so I thought I could explain it a little bit to you now. So what I did was to add 7 straight layers to our base layer. I decided to add them up until where I added the white petticoat fabric, because straight layers, in contrast to circular layers, have more gathering at the top, and so I thought I could hide the black a little bit better with all those straight layers. All of those layers contain of either 4 or 6 pieces of the tulle fabric, and I interchanged it a little bit because I feel like when they all have a different hem, they don't collapse as much. You can think about it this way: when you have 2 layers of a fabric and you gather it together, then they both will lay on top of each other the whole time, even though they are gathered and the hem is a bit more wobbly maybe, but both layers will have this like wobble together, if that makes sense. And I feel like even though when it's gathered differently, when it's still the same hem circumference, then this happens too, that both layers will directly lay on top of each other, and this way the skirt won't get the fluff we want to accomplish. So that's why I always interchange the density of the layers a little bit. In total, I already used around 15 meters of tulle just for the base layers here, and you can clearly see how much fabric it is when you see the skirt twirling around. I know when it hangs on the mannequin it doesn't look like much as of now, but when this moves you can already see how nice the movement of the whole skirt will later look like, and you can definitely see how much fabric already went into it. And so the next step would be to add circular layers. And now you probably think, why do I change it up? Like, why do I not only use straight layers or not only use curved layers? And the answer is actually simple, but also a bit more complicated in a way. So let me try to explain it to you. It all comes down to saving fabric and time. But in order to understand it, you have to think about the differences of a straight layer and a curved layer. The way we make a straight layer is, as you've seen before, just a stripe cut from the fabric, which means the top of the layer and the bottom of the layer will have the same length, which is perfect for the lower layers because we already have a big circumference in the base layer there, and we also want a big circumference in the actual hem later. So the difference from where the layer will be sewn to the skirt to the hem isn't as much. So it's easy to just take straight layers, gather them a little bit at the top, and then add them to whatever height you need. Doing those layers is easy because, as I said before, you just cut straight pieces, sew them together, gather them at the top, and then sew them to the base layer. In contrast to that, making circular layers takes a lot more effort because you not only just cut one straight line, you have to cut the whole circle and also like the inside of the circle. You have to measure a lot, you have to fold the fabric in a different way because cutting the straight layers can just be done by unrolling the fabric and then cutting the straight line. And as you can see, this not only is a lot more work but also takes a lot more fabric because by cutting circles you will have some leftover fabric that was cut away. And so it doesn't fit on the fabric the same way as just a straight layer does. The good thing with the circular layers, on the other hand, is that you achieve a very wide hem with a very small base. And this is especially helpful when you've already built up some volume, so the hem you have to add on top of it needs to be wide. But on the other hand, the top where you will attach the layer already gets smaller and smaller, so you don't actually have to add as much fabric on there as before. So you can see the more we are going up on the skirt, the more it shifts from straight layers being useful to circular layers being useful. And once we're at a high point and we would decide on still using straight layers, we would have to gather so much fabric on there to achieve the wide hem we want at the bottom that we would have to cut a lot of panels for one layer. And since the layers themselves get longer and longer, not only the usefulness of the different layer types changes, but also the amount of fabric you would need to cut each layer. So you see that what's good to be used at the bottom is not necessarily good to be used at the top because it loses all its advantages that it has here. And that's why I usually decide somewhere between the middle point and 2/3 of the skirt to switch it up and not use straight layers anymore and start to use circular layers. This is of course just a personal preference, taking into consideration the amount of fabric I have to use, also the time I have to spend on a skirt, and also just like my personal preference and being annoyed with straight layers at some point. And you can always decide against switching up. Because, for example, if you have a lot of fabric and you really want the top to be puffy, then maybe using straight layers on the top as well would work very nice, because in order to have a wide skirt, you would have to achieve a white hem on the last layers, and therefore you would have to gather a lot of fabric at the top, which would make the top very poofy. And if that's what you're going for and you have enough fabric and you like to cut straight layers for days, then this is maybe the right technique for you. But with time and making a few tulle skirts myself, this is what I've settled for. This is what my favorite technique to make a big tulle skirt is. And maybe you want to incorporate it into your next tulle skirt somehow. So that's why we're going to switch up from making straight layers to circular layers now. I think I've really explained this step enough now, so we should probably go ahead and actually cut some circular layers now. To create the circular layers, we still have to continue with the length from each line from the base layer to the ground. But instead of just cutting this length from the fabric, we will use our templates and measure from there. This is done exactly like on the base layer. The template will be laid onto the fabric, and then the lines on it are used to measure the correct length all around. When working on the smaller layers, it's still possible to fold the fabric 2 times to get directly a full circle once folding it open again. But since I would recommend to use more pieces here as well, the circle has to be cut open so that we can later attach the pieces together. For the layers here, I'm alternating between the small and the big templates to get some variety in the layers as well. But if you don't want to use one, you can directly draw the curves onto the layers here. After preparing all the layers, which means again sewing them together and gathering them at the top, they are added onto the base layer the same way as the straight layers before. This time, however, it feels like a lot more fabric to handle and the skirt is rapidly growing in volume. At the last step, all the layers are sewn to the base, making sure to divide the gathering evenly all around. Hi, so it's the skirt with all of the straight layers added and most of the circular layers. You can see that there are 2 lines missing where I still need to attach some layers, but I will do them a little bit different from the skirt layers we did until now. So I wanted to give you a quick update and show you how this looks, because I feel like this alone could be a cool tulle skirt. Until now all of the layers had the same length, so the tulle skirt has the same length all around, but from now on I will change up the length of the layers so that they will be longer in the back, so that I'll get a little bit of a train. So if you don't want a train, you don't have to do those steps that way, and you can just continue to make the circular layers like this. And to show you how this would look, I thought I could just twirl around a little bit and show you the skirt in this state, so you know how it looks if it's just a tulle skirt with one length all around. So I think that's it. I hope you like the inside look. I also like that you can still see the places where I had to patch it together a little bit. So it's not completely lost, and I really like it because it shows some character, I guess. So next up is closing the center back, and I'll of course show you how to do it, but I'll probably do it tomorrow, I think. So see you tomorrow. Closing the bag is a bit intimidating, but actually quite easy. The most important thing is that you have some kind of support for your skirt, so you have all of its weight somewhere else and you can focus on the center back. Then you turn the skirt inside out and start by closing the base layer, starting around 25 centimeters from the top. Here you have to make sure that the tulle layers are tucked aside and won't be catched in the seam. And after that you can continue to close each tulle layer individually, starting from the bottom. With each layer done, you fold it up until you can reach the top of the next layer and then close the center back there, making sure to start as high as possible. Once you get towards the top of the skirt, you have to keep in mind that the top 25 centimeters of the skirt need to stay open to be able to access the skirt. So you always have to check that each of the higher tulle layers has the opening the same length as the base layer from where they are connected down. Then the last few tulle layers can be added. Making them works the same as with the circular layers before. This time, however, I'm not using one length or a round, but using the measurement from the base layer line down to the bottom at the front, and then gradually making the layer longer towards the back, so that in the end I have a train at the center back. To get variety in the layers, I not only use the different negative patterns again, but also start with the layer made from one circle first, and then make each layer bigger until the last one is made from 4 pieces. I'm also making sure to make each layer a little bit longer at the center back, so that the train slowly grows from the skirt and looks more natural this way. And just like that, the last layer is gathered on the skirt and sewn onto it. So now our tulle skirt is finally done. Since I'm going to use it as a base for a dress, I won't add any finishing touches just yet. But if you want to use it just as a tulle skirt, you'll probably want to add some closure. So I will quickly go over how I would do it. My go-to way to add closure to a tulle skirt is by combining hooks and eyes and a lining layer with an invisible zipper. Since I'm not doing this on this skirt, here's how I made it on the Lily of the Valley gown. I first made a lining layer from a half circle, using the same technique as before, and then added an invisible zipper to it. We don't want a closure that takes away from the puffiness of all the skirt layers, so the opening in the back on all the layers stays just like that. But once the lining layer is added into the skirt, it makes sure nothing will poke through while wearing it. At the final step, a waistband is added, to which I then sew a hook and eyes closure. And the puffiness of the tulle layers usually hide the invisible zipper from the lining. Now the final thing we have to talk about is how to store something as big as this, because I personally sadly don't have the closet space to just put it on a hanger and hang it there just for it to wait for the next occasion where you apparently can wear a massive tulle skirt. And that's why I had to come up with some different ideas how I can store my projects, because otherwise it would definitely get out of hand. And luckily, the good thing about this is that it's basically fabric and a lot of air. And in contrast to something that includes a hoop skirt, for example, we can just fold and press it together as we want until it's as small as possible. And so I usually, wait a moment, just put it into a box like this. What's inside of this now is not the finished tulle skirt, but all of my fabric scraps. And I assure you, this pile would be as massive as the skirt. But putting a skirt into something like this usually takes up less space than having it like this. So this is usually what I do. And now you probably ask, what happens when I have to take it out of here? Because it will probably look as wrinkly as this. But getting it to look like it first did when you sewed it is really easy. You just have to put it on a hanger and hang it as high as possible so that all the layers are hanging freely. And then you just have to steam it as much as you can. If you don't have a steamer, that's not a problem at all. You can also use your iron, for example, and then just use the steam function of that. Or if you don't have an iron that has this function, you can also just take a long hot shower and then hang the tulle skirt into the bathroom or the shower cabin after you're finished, because the steam and the build-up heat in your bathroom will also help the tulle layers to relax. And then you'll just go in under all the layers and pull them down slowly. And then you'll slowly see all the wrinkles disappear and the tulle skirt will look smooth again and is ready for your next adventure. I hope this video could function as a little guide for you how to construct your own tulle skirt and how to make your own version. If you want to make the exact version I did in this video, feel free to check out my Patreon, where I'll upload a guide with all the different layers and measurements. I also want to thank NordVPN again for sponsoring today's video. Feel free to check them out via nordvpn.com/Frieda or using the link in the description. This way you'll get a 2-year plan for free, plus 4 months with a huge discount. If you liked today's video, feel free to like it, comment and subscribe to my channel. This would help me out a lot. And of course, I hope I'll see you in the next video.